why. He just chose to be very private about his case, which is a pretty personal thing. You don't necessarily just say, hey, what was it like, raping those 80-year-old women? Was that fun? Yeah, that wasn't the line of conversation. We talked on an array of subjects, but it's hard to describe. I mean, did you want a specific interaction or story? Because I got a couple of good ones with him. There's one really good one comes to mind if you want me to tell it.
All right, I'll tell you what. I'm going to let you tell the one story on Ramirez, and then we'll move on to Norris and Bittaker. Because damn, you know what? I could sit there and ask you about 8 million people, but yeah,
right.
I'll go ahead and let you. Since we broached the topic of Ramirez, I'll go ahead and let you tell it. Feel free.
All right, here it is. We're sitting there talking, and he asked me something about Son of Sam. He said, somebody tried to kill David Berkowitz not too long ago, cutting his throat. And I said, yeah, they did. And he goes, he's become a Christian, And my response was, yeah, what a fucking sellout. And Ramirez, kind of like held up his hand like in a calming down, calm, no, it happens to some people. And I said, oh yeah, why doesn't it happen to you? And Ramirez looked down and he looked up kind of at a glance with, his eyebrows coming in. And he said, well, I guess you could say I'm on the same page. And I was just like, oh, man, if I could have had that taped, it was just perfect the way it came out. Completely unremorseful, basically saying, yeah, I am the same way I was when I got out, when I came in. Or I'm the same way now that I'm in as I was when I was out. I'm not remorseful. I'm not sorry. Yeah, it was and the little things like that he would say, you just read between the lines and know exactly what he's saying. So that's one of my favorite Ramirez stories.
Amazing. All right. So, since the topic was Toolbox Killers this week, I will go ahead and ask it this way because Vic and I, look, we're nowhere near the expertise or knowledge that you have. I mean, you're right. Not that we haven't liked true crime or serial killers or any of that our whole lives, but it's amped up a bit because of our show here. And we started talking about H.H. Holmes like 2 years ago, and it just kind of snowballed. For you, when was the first time you heard about Bittaker and Norris? Because again, this is not as much as it was kind of infamous at the time. I don't think a lot of people know who they are. In 2017.
Oh yeah, I mean. When they were killing people, I was, 2 years old. So, it wasn't something that I read about in the press. I think I first discovered Norris maybe when I bought that stupid. Well, no, it wasn't when I bought the serial killer letters. It somehow his name, their names popped up on I finally found an address list. Going through the internet, I started figuring out how to use it, and their names came up. And I remember that, the thing actually said, +6. And after doing some research, of course, there's only 5. But, I started reading about him a little bit. And I don't particularly study a case unless I make contact. And Norris responded. I told him, look, I want to visit. And he, very quickly sent me a form. I went to see him. And then I wrote Larry and said, hey, I've want to, correspond, maybe want to visit, and he writes me back very politely saying he didn't want to. And I wrote him back and was like, oh, no, I'm the guy who just saw Roy. You want to write me? I'm not just some, average guy. He writes me back, what makes you think I want to write to you even then? And he was hella rude. And I tried again. He shot me down even worse. So I wrote him back a Bittaker a fourth time. I was like, yeah, no. Let me regroup. I sent him a birthday card. And I was one of 2 in 2006, and that's what got me in with him. Back to your question, I had him nailed down before 2005, because I think I started writing Norris in 2004. I'd probably say I figured, when I started really reading about, the only crimes I ever studied before I went to prison were teen killers, because, I was a youngster. Again, it wasn't about collecting. It was just an interest. So I was reading more about teen killers, particularly satanic teen killers. And I also had, a thing for, Jeffrey Dahmer just because of, the cannibalism. And it was interesting. It was macabre. And I did, like, quote unquote, like Ramirez, but it wasn't because of who they were. It was their cases. It wasn't their personalities or anything. I don't think I knew about Bittaker and Norris until sometime probably in early 2000, and it was probably from seeing their name on a serial killer address list, and me, once I started corresponding with Norris, I started, asking him, are you comfortable with talking about your case? And he said yes, but of course he didn't remember most of it because of all the drugs they never did while they were doing this. And, I'd say, well, let's, tell me what happened with victim 1. And, of course, this thing was he doesn't remember all the PCP. It was in snippets. And Larry, of course, denies there was any drugs involved. He said maybe a little bit of pot, but never any PCP, never any of that. And, I started learning from them. I hate to read something and then meet an inmate, and they're like, that's not even remotely close to the truth. And you've got to be careful. Unless you're reading court transcripts, which, let me tell you, just because you're reading a court transcript doesn't make it so at all. But if you're reading a court transcript is closer to the truth than a true crime author. If you ever want to find out about a case, don't buy true crime books. They are a bust. I've read very few that are any good. They mostly sensationalize the crimes. They want to make the inmates or the offenders out to be the worst possible things they can be. I mean, not trying to get off topic, but I mean, if you read Helter Skelter, the Manson motive was to start a race war, and the blacks that win were going to be ruled by Manson. I ask people, say that out loud to yourself. Doesn't that sound pretty fucking stupid? Because it is. That's ridiculous. This is not true. It's really not true. And if you actually, that's the stupidest. And I'm surprised. It doesn't surprise me that 12 idiots in the community would be convinced of that by a prosecutor who tried 106 cases and got 105 convictions. He was what you call a good attorney, and he went clear with it. And then when he got that case under his belt, all he had to do was write his book. Stephen Kay, the assistant prosecutor in the Manson case, went on to prosecute Bittaker and Norris. And I've seen him on TV. He's crying about the victims and all that. Let me tell you something. He didn't care. I'm sorry, and he, if he hears this and says that I said he didn't care, that's those guys' jobs. They do it day out, and they're just worried about a conviction. In fact, Bittaker and Norris could have been innocent, and they would have still done for the conviction.
Well, I can say this without speaking specifically about them. Court is like, let's make a deal. It's all about winning. It's just like a game or anything else. They don't give a shit about anything beyond, I want to win. What can I do that's best for me? So I agree with that. It's
what you can prove and who puts on a better show. And unless you have some money to hire an attorney who's better than the prosecutor, who knows how to A, pick a jury, and B, what not to say, you're screwed. I mean, I've been arrested before, didn't have an attorney, and went to prison for 2 years. I was arrested years later on even worse charges, facing 14 years, and after $21,000 in attorney fees, I got 90 days in jail. That's the difference an attorney makes.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about it. Okay, so I'll tell you what. You say you don't read true crime, documentaries, they're all bullshit for the most part. And you know what? And you're right, it is all about sensationalism. I can't disagree. Not that I don't enjoy it. I will tell you that.
Oh, no, and it's not. I mean, Goodbye Helter Skelter by George Simpson is a great book. Long Dark Road about the Jasper case was actually done pretty fair and balanced. But you start, oh gosh, reading crap, like Helter Skelter, or this book about the De Leon case, Dead Reckoning. Some of this stuff is just so biased and one-sided. It's not even real. The problem is, if you read it, you're like, oh, these bloodthirsty, these are people. I mean, they're human. They're really no different than you or I, somebody who commits murder. Just because you kill someone doesn't mean you don't love your mom. It doesn't mean you don't love your kids. It just means you've killed somebody. That's all it means. And, you go back, a couple hundred years, people were killing each other all the time. You watch some of these Viking shows they try to keep them pretty historically accurate. Historically accurate enough to the rating. Yeah, there's only so many ways you can raid a village and sack it and then rape all the women. I mean, it was pretty gnarly, and that's what people did. And then you go back to the days of Rome with the Colosseum. People were watching people get killed for fun. That was Saturday Night Football. Let's go to the Colosseum and watch people get killed and fed the lions and bring the kids.
You make great. I was gonna say you make great points there, and so I'm gonna go ahead and ask it from somebody who's actually met the guys, Norris and Bittaker. Tell me the story of the Toolbox Killers. Let's say a child asks you 20 years from now, maybe not a child, a teenager, an adult even, wants to know the story of the Toolbox Killers, and you can be as detailed or not detailed as you want, but tell me the story of what happened, in the late 70s, early 80s.
My big thing, and I asked this to both Bittaker and Norris, what's the biggest misconception about your case? And I remember Larry said, we didn't torture all the victims. And I'm like, you kidnapped these girls and raped them. And I go, unfortunately, the only one you audio taped, you seemed to torture her. He goes, yeah, but that was a fluke. I'm the Zen serial killer. I was actually quite pleasant and nice. And I'm like, no, Larry, you weren't pleasant and nice. These girls were held under duress, and you raped them. Some of them for 48 hours. I go, that's unbearable. I go, that's, real shitty. And he's like, but it's not torture. And I'm like, you ran ice picks into this girl's ear after she begged you. That's not torture. Well, it's not torture. But I go, oh, maybe the minimizing on his part with that particular, the torture thing. Let me tell you something. Those girls had it rough. I would say it started as an idea, almost like a boyhood type fantasy. Bittaker and Norris were both in prison. Larry for stealing cars, Norris for rape, and they would joke about building underground bunkers where they would kidnap girls and tell them they've been abducted by aliens. And they were going to protect them, and the girls would ultimately fall in love with them and would want to fuck them until they could be freed. And then eventually would give them a bunch of acid and just throw them out on the street. They'd be telling this crazy story about aliens nobody believed because they were just drugged out kids. And that was kind of the joke they had between each other talking about it. They both agreed there was no getting a girl from every age. They said that was never a discussion. They weren't, trying to kill a girl, at every age from 12 to 19 or whatever it was. It just was a thing about kidnapping girls and having them fall in love. I think both of, Bittaker and Norris were a little socially awkward when it came to women. I don't think they knew how to. They told me stories where they flirted with girls, where it seemed like they had, pretty, well-to-do, kind of like they were suave enough, but they didn't have, they never could cite personal relationships. I think they just had a problem expressing affection to other people. I think they felt a little bit alienated, and I think the frustration just kept building. And one day they got out of prison and started hanging out, and it just kind of began as pranks. They were tapping phones. They would follow girls. They'd pick one out and follow them as long as they could without them being seen. They would be using walkie-talkies, and it just, again, all in good fun. Stalking for fun. And that's what they were doing. Eventually they got the van, and it just became and this is, my understanding is they both went into this knowing exactly what was going to be done, what had to be done after, and, once the girl was grabbed, it had to go full, it had to be carried out from beginning to end. There was going to be that abduction, the calming down period, as Larry called it, where he told him, look, if you behave and cooperate, we'll let you go, we just want to have some fun. You rape them and then you kill them. And once it happened, it just kind of kept happening. And I think they kind of fed off of each other. I'm not sure if either of them, Norris had raped before. He had rape on his jacket. But Norris said he never wanted to kill anybody. Like, it was even though it had to be done, he really just wanted to let him go. Even though he had ways in his head he wouldn't get caught. Drugging them on acid, he'd think. Nobody believed a girl on acid. That was one of the things that they would often say that, for Norris, but, Bittaker being much more of a realist, he's like, yeah, once you kidnap a person, you have to kill them. If you're going to do this, you can't let them go. He one time told me that Charles Ng had a much better system down, having the bunker in Calaveras County and keeping the women for months on end. He one time said, yeah, he was doing it much better than we were. And again, this is the type of conversation